By the time most people come to see me, they've already Googled the answer 12 times, read 16 articles, listened to 4 podcasts, and watched a TED Talk. They've also asked 3 friends, a mentor, and possibly a psychic. No judgment. And they still can't decide. What I've learned over my 30 years is that all that research wasn't helping them move forward. Every single hour was the reason they were stuck. We'd been sold a story about analysis paralysis. Apparently, you can't decide because you have too many options or you haven't found the right information yet. The research is considerably less flattering than that. A 2025 pre-registered study involving 301 participants found that intolerance of uncertainty can directly increase indecisiveness. It wasn't simply the number of options, your intelligence, or a gap in your research. The brain was waiting for a feeling of certainty that wasn't coming. The research loop was how it pretended to be doing something about it. It looked productive while keeping the decision safely out of reach. Being a behaviour expert, I can count on one hand the number of clients who came to me with an actual information deficit. Most of them already knew more about the decision than anyone else reasonably needed to know. They had enough information to make the decision months ago. What they didn't have was permission to act without a guarantee. So they kept searching because searching feels like progress. It also looks like due diligence. Nobody can accuse you of being reckless when you're reading your 47th comparison article. When you encounter a decision that carries uncertainty, your brain begins assessing the possible risk. Your attention shifts towards everything that could go wrong. It also starts searching for everything you might have overlooked or later regret. What follows is a loop that looks productive but isn't. You research and your anxiety drops temporarily. Doing something feels better than sitting with the discomfort. Your brain begins associating more research with relief, so it requests more research whenever the anxiety comes back up. The internal threshold for enough keeps shifting. The brain isn't only waiting for information, it's waiting for a feeling of certainty. And that certainty has never once arrived through reading another article. This resembles the reassurance loops we see in anxiety and OCD. Temporary relief reinforces the behaviour and the goalposts keep moving. The person isn't really looking for better information anymore. They're looking for the feeling that enough information exists. Feelings don't obey spreadsheets, so the search never properly ends. In 2000, research ran a study in a supermarket. Shoppers were offered either 6 jam flavours or 24. The display with 24 flavours attracted more attention. More people stopped and looked at it. But only around 3% of those shoppers bought a jar. When people were shown 6 flavours, around 30% bought one. More options attracted more interest. Fewer options produced far more purchases. But the famous jam study is only part of the picture. A later meta-analysis of 63 experiments found that choice overload depends heavily on the situation. The effect becomes much weaker when somebody already knows what they want. It also weakens when they have a clear criteria for comparing the options. And most people skip that step completely. They start comparing options before deciding what they're comparing them against. There's a personality profile in the research called a Maximiser. Those people don't aim for an option that is good enough to do the job. They aim for the single best possible option. And the data on them is almost comedic. They experience greater decision difficulty and more social comparison. They are also more sensitive to regret and less satisfied after choosing. The moment they select one option, the brain starts auditing everything else they might have missed. Choosing one thing suddenly feels like losing all the others. And in my experience, they're very often high performers. They're entrepreneurs, executives, and people who are genuinely excellent at what they do. The thoroughness that helps them succeed is exactly what traps them at the decision point. They know how to analyse, compare, predict, and improve. They just don't know when to stop. People often avoid making a decision because they're trying to avoid regret. The entire engine is what if I choose wrongly and later wish I'd done something different. A meta-analysis of 59 results found no evidence that decision avoidance reliably protects people from that regret. In some circumstances, avoiding or delaying the decision was linked with greater regret. They actually regretted the time they lost and the opportunities they missed, and they regretted the month that turned into a year. The avoidance strategy was built on a promise it couldn't keep. It offered protection from future regret and then created a different form of regret itself. Israeli researchers examined 1,112 parole decisions made by 8 judges over 10 months. At the beginning of decision sessions, favourable rulings occurred in roughly 65% of cases. That figure fell dramatically as the session continues, and it rose again after a break. The original researchers argued that repeated decision-making may have pushed the judges towards the easier default of refusing parole. Later researchers questioned whether case ordering and administrative factors could explain part of the problem. So we can't honestly say whether someone got their freedom based on whether the judge had lunch or not. What the study does show is that context and timing can influence a decision more than people realise. When mental effort rises, inaction and the familiar option can become increasingly attractive. Your brain can do something similar after days, weeks, or months of comparison. It defaults to no action because no action requires no commitment. It also carries no immediate possibility of being wrong. You're safe, stationary, and still reading reviews from 2019. So what's the fix? The standard advice is to get comfortable with uncertainty. And that's about as useful as telling somebody with a broken leg to get comfortable with walking the stairs. What the research suggests is more specific and more achievable. You stop demanding certainty before you act. You build the capacity to decide while certainty is still absent. You're not being asked to enjoy the unknown. You're being asked to stop letting it run the clock. And this is what I do with clients. First, we use the 3 criteria rule. Before you compare one more option, name the 3 things that genuinely matter for this decision. Maybe it's, does it solve the problem? Can you resource it? Does it fit your current priorities? When an option passes all 3, it's sufficient. The search is over. We close the tabs. The second is to set an evidence limit. Decide before you begin how many sources, conversations, or days of research the decision warrants. And you pre-decide the limit because the anxious brain cannot be trusted to announce that it's finally gathered enough information. It will keep requesting one more opinion. The moment you exceed the limit, you're probably no longer researching, you are avoiding. And part of you already knows that. Third, no decision framework will permanently change a belief that has become an unconscious operating rule. The real instruction running the loop is, I must be certain before I act. Your brain has filed that instruction as protection. It believes uncertainty means danger and mistakes mean consequences. It also believes waiting is safer than choosing. More information cannot revise an instruction that was never created through information. This is a learned psychological pattern. It operates before the conscious mind begins listing pros and cons. What I use is the delete method, my framework for identifying and deleting the old negative pattern. Then we build the state needed to act differently. I use hypnosis to install that new response so it becomes automatic. You no longer have to consciously battle yourself whenever a decision appears. The work isn't about forcing yourself to make a decision. It's about changing what your brain believes will happen when you decide without a guarantee. So, if you find yourself researching decisions for longer than feels rational, you probably already know enough to act. You're waiting for a guarantee that isn't coming. It doesn't mean that you're incapable of making a decision. It just means your brain wants certainty. And if you want to do something about it, the link's in the description, along with my procrastinator profile diagnosis tool.